The railcar ferry dragged her stern behind her in Lake Michigan, limping for Sheboygan. She was so close and yet so far, and if only she could get just a little further. Rail cars were jettisoned off the boat, CQDs rang out on the airwaves, and the crew hoped for the best while preparing for the worst. The boat's sister pulled alongside her, waiting to save her passengers and crew. Without warning, the boat lurched and the stern was being pulled under aggressively, like a shark pulling a seal back under the water. A loud boom sounded, the boat bursting apart and disappearing beneath the waves without another word. But what caused this? November is always a great month for Great Lakes boats, and today, we start with SS Pere Marquette 18. She was built for Pere Marquette Railway Company by American Shipbuilding Company as yard number 412, being launched on August 16, 1902 and completed by August 1st of that year. She was a 350-foot train ferry operating out of Grand Haven, Michigan. She was intended to cross lake service on Lake Michigan between the lake's western side, like the ports of Kewaunee, Manitowoc, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the eastern side, like the port of Ludington, Michigan. She received her first enrollment in Cleveland, Ohio on July 19, 1902, and her initial home port was Saginaw, Michigan. She received her permanent enrollment in Port Huron, Michigan on March 6, 1903. Port Huron also became her home port at this point. Sometime during her short 8-year career, she would land in her final home port of Grand Haven. Her home port changed numerous times, as you can tell, and that's not necessarily uncommon. On November 4, 1903, Pere Marquette 18 rescued the crew of 6 from the sinking schooner barge A.T. Bliss, which while bound from Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin for Ludington, broke loose from the tug Sydney Smith. In 1907, Pere Marquette 18 was chartered by the Chicago and South Haven Steamship Company of Chicago, Illinois for the Independence Day weekend. In 1909, Pere Marquette 18 was chartered by the Chicago and South Haven Steamship Company for service as an excursion steamer between the two. Her car deck was planked over in order to host dancing and music. Several fruit machines were also installed. She spent the summers of 1909 and 1910 giving pleasure cruises between Chicago and Waukegan, Illinois. At the end of her 1910 pleasure cruise season, Pere Marquette 18 was converted back to a train ferry. On September 8, 1910, after passing an official government inspection in Ludington, she rejoined the train ferry fleet. But she wouldn't last long. If you like my content and want more cool stuff to watch, please check out our new channel, Aviation Disasters Explained. The first videos go up for that channel on November 29th. Okay friends, it's time to get into the final voyage. On September 8, 1910, at 11:30 p.m., Pere Marquette 18 left Ludington, Michigan under the command of Captain Peter Kilty with 62 passengers and crew, including Captain Kilty, and 29 rail cars filled with coal and miscellaneous freight on board. On September 9th, around 3 a.m. or 4:30 a.m., sources differ, while about halfway across Lake Michigan, the helmsman of Pere Marquette 18 began complaining that she wasn't steering properly. At about the same time, an oiler who went to oil the propeller shaft bearings reported to the bridge that there was about 7 feet of water in her stern. The initial location of the flood was under the crew's quarters, also called the flicker. Captain Kilty ordered the pump to be turned on, but they were not able to keep up with the influx of water. Eventually, her stern was dragging so low that water started seeping in the portholes, increasing the rate of flooding exponentially. Captain Kilty then ordered the course to be altered to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and that 9 rail cars be jettisoned. Some sources state it was 4 rail cars and others 13, but most say 9. At around 5 a.m., by orders of Captain Kilty, purser and wireless operator Stephen S. Spanik sent out the CQD, quote, "Car ferry number 18 sinking. Help!" This was repeated continually for almost an hour. The radio operator on Pere Marquette 18's sister ship, Pere Marquette 17, picked up the call and headed to her rescue. Pere Marquette 17 eventually reached Pere Marquette 18 and pulled up alongside her to try and save the people on board. However, at approximately 7:30 a.m., Pere Marquette 18 suddenly sank stern first, with her bow rising high up into the air. As she sank, the air pressure that built up in her hull caused her to explode, which likely killed several people on board. 27 people on Pere Marquette 18 were killed. Pere Marquette 17 also lost 2 of her own crew when the lifeboat they were in smashed against her hull. In addition to Pere Marquette 17, the ferry Pere Marquette 20 and the tug AAC Tesley, which was towing the life-saving crew, also arrived on the scene. Pere Marquette 18 had disappeared deep into Lake Michigan. But what exactly happened here? Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Alright, let's look at the possible causes of this sinking. The cause of Pere Marquette 18's sinking remains unknown. However, there's some speculation. It's been speculated that during her time as a pleasure boat, charter captains rowed her hard and put her away wet, so she was not well maintained when it came to her last voyage. She'd also been damaged numerous times by hard dockings, having hit several pilings, and due to the need for excursions, this damage was left unaddressed. There is so much damage that can be caused. Bent, warped, or loosened steel plates have been theorized, and that's highly likely. As she rode much lower in the water with rail cars rather than just passengers, these dysfunctional steel plates would be below water and allow Lake Michigan to flood the boat. It's also been rumored that there were 2 stowaways on board who may have contributed to the sinking by not securing their portholes, which would have significantly increased the rate of the flooding. We can look at a similar example. HMHS Britannic, little sister of Olympic and Titanic, operated during World War I as a hospital ship off Greece when she struck a sea mine. The way the ship had struck the mine would not have been fatal had the nurses followed standing orders on board and kept the portholes closed. Unfortunately, they had opened them to allow fresh air into the ship, and this doomed Britannic and significantly sped up her demise. She sank nearly 3 times faster than Titanic did. So, portholes being open on a ship or boat in danger is seriously huge, and can absolutely spell out the end for the vessel when otherwise it could have been survivable. There's also the theory that during Pere Marquette 18's conversion back to a ferry, one of her seacocks was accidentally left open and no one noticed, therefore allowing tons of water to just flood in. This is a possibility, as is a leaking propeller shaft. Both of these leaks would have been much slower, stealthier, and harder to detect until it was too late, which is what we see in this story. It was too little, too late by the time they noticed the ship was sinking. The wreck was discovered on July 23, 2020, and she rests in about 500 feet of water about 25 miles off Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Her stern is completely buried in the mud, with her bow rising 70 to 100 feet off the lake bottom at a 30 to 40 degree angle. Her decks have collapsed, and her pilot house, which broke off and spun around when she sank, lies on her stern. One of the rail cars is visible, and a field of debris surrounds the wreck. The wreck is engulfed in invasive zebra mussels. Since the stern is buried so deep in the mud, we may never know the true cause of her sinking. In some parts of Lake Michigan, especially near Sheboygan, where Pere Marquette 18 sank, the sediment deep in the lake is extremely soft. And in this area, it is especially soft thanks to the Sheboygan River, which slowly deposits soft sediment into Lake Michigan. I tell you this because it makes sense that a ship that experienced an explosion and sank quickly, possibly slamming into the bottom of the lake much harder than we think it would sink into the mud so deeply and get stuck the way it did. 500 feet is a long way to sink, especially in fresh water, and the boat would have struck the lake bottom with a hydraulic outburst and downblast effect that would have stirred up the lake bottom and wedged it firmly in the mud. Thanks to the mud of Lake Michigan, Pere Marquette 18 will retain her secrets.